Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Shabas Solutions podcast. I'm Tim Stedman, and this afternoon we will focus on digital health technologies and their use and potential in decentralized clinical trial monitoring and data collection. Our expert today is Dr. Adam Ruskin. Dr. Ruskin has over 27 years of experience in clinical operations and development, including supporting more than 24 startup companies, supporting clinical trials, including COVID vaccine, and most recently supporting decentralized trials as a contractor for the FDA. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Tim.
Adam, can you start by telling us what is a digital health technology or a DHT and provide us with some examples?
Sure. So, in its simplest form, a digital health technology is a category of data collection tools. So, some of the categories of data collection tools that you're probably more familiar with are going to be your simple or static tools, such as a thermometer or a weight scale that record a piece of data one time. Um, and then another category is a questionnaire where a patient is given a series of questions to answer, and an instruction sheet to follow to how to answer those questions, and a way to score those questions that the patient responds to in order to come up with a result. And that's usually given also at one time or over multiple times during a patient's participation in a clinical trial. Now, this new category, well, not so new, it's been around for many decades at this point, are digital health technologies. And these are data collection tools that collect large amounts of data on an ongoing basis. That's one of the main differences, where it can collect data for several minutes, hours, days, or weeks, even. And some examples of some of these would be like a smartwatch that collects your heart rate or your blood glucose levels on an ongoing basis, or a chest strap monitor that would monitor your heart rate and rhythm on an ongoing basis as you wear it.
What makes digital health technologies unique from traditional at-home collection tools?
So the main difference really is just the volume of data that's being collected for one, and second of all, it gives you more of a real world scenario of what the patient's data is looking like. They're not data points being collected at one point in a doctor's office. These are being collected at home during regular activities, during regular sleep, regular activities of daily living, sports, whatever. And you're collecting data sometimes multiple times per second. So you'll have a large volume of data, often with a large amount of missing data within that time period, because the patient doesn't want to wear their DHT at certain times, or the battery ran out and has to be recharged. Um, so, uh, Similar to a questionnaire, though, where you can have a lot of missing data because a patient doesn't want to or can't answer certain questions, but that's given one time. A DHT is where data is collected on an ongoing basis over a fairly large period of time. Uh, and then, similar to the questionnaire, you have to figure out how we're going to analyze the data, which includes all of the missing data.
What are some of the major differences between the types of data collection tools?
So, with a static type of or simple data collection tool, the data is either present or it's missing. It's a one or zero. It's either there or it's not there. And you'll see these very often in clinical trials where a patient's weight needs to be measured on an ongoing basis, or their blood pressure needs to be measured on an ongoing basis during the trial. Um, with a questionnaire, the data can be missing, as we mentioned, because a lot of these questionnaires, they can be quite lengthy. And even sometimes the physician will be filling out the questionnaire as they're observing the patient, and they might not be able to pick everything up. So there can be missing data. But with a digital health technology, with a DHT, there can be just large volumes of missing data.
Can DHTs be classified into different types?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, there's wearables such as your chest strap monitor or your smartwatch. Those are the ones that most people are already familiar with. Um, but you don't necessarily have to wear a digital health technology. Some of these you can just be touching. For example, there's driving simulators that are used in a lot of clinical trials to determine if a drug causes drowsiness, for example, like a pain medication or an allergy type of medication. And those are basically where you sit in a chair and touch a steering wheel, and you're essentially playing a video game for a length of time, collecting large amounts of data over an hour or even longer. Um, there's DHTs that can be ingested, for example. You have some that can measure, basically, you're swallowing a coated pill that could register where in the GI tract um, the pill is currently located. You have DHTs that can be implanted, such as something that can be implanted in the brain itself that can measure tremors, which can measure it much more accurately than a patient can record it for how long and whether one's occurring or not. And then you also have DHTs, which don't necessarily even have to touch a patient, such as infrared cameras that can record whether a tumor or whether a wound is healing by infrared types of measurements over a period of time.
Why aren't DHTs being frequently used in clinical trial monitoring and data collection?
So, they are used for some types of trials. They have been used for a number of decades. I've worked on close to 500 trials over the years, but right, the vast majority of them do not or have not involved DHTs. But there have been some that have involved DHTs. And this trend is, at the current time, rapidly increasing. And I'll tell you why. Well, one of the reasons that they have not been used very frequently is that they're quite challenging to validate and verify. And unlike a questionnaire or a simple data collection tool, which can be widely used, they can be validated and verified pretty rapidly, and not, and in a cost-effective manner as well. DHTs could take over a year to validate one of them for a particular use in a particular patient population. It can cost well over $1 million to do the validation. So the engineering companies that develop these DHTs, and there's many, many hundreds of DHTs out there for all kinds of therapeutic areas, they're typically developed for use for specific physicians, for their specific patients, with really no intention for them to be validated for use in a clinical trial. They're designed to be used for actual, patients themselves. Engineering firms would not typically have any reason to validate and verify their instruments. They're not pharmaceutical companies. They're not biotech companies. They don't have the staff or usually the funds to go about validating and verifying their instruments to meet FDA requirements. And then pharma companies themselves, most companies are small startup types of companies. They don't have funds or the time in particular to validate and verify these instruments on their own. Whereas with questionnaires, which are already available and may have been validated for these patients many, many years ago, and same for simple data collection tools. Why bother often to validate these DHTs when there's already tools available?
Are there other issues preventing DHTs from being used as compared to standardized methods like questionnaires?
So if, let's say, a pharmaceutical company was to go validate and verify use of a digital health technology so they could use it down the line in a trial maybe a year later when they would actually need it, if their trial becomes successful, then this has already been shown that this is a validated and verified data collection tool. So now it opens the doors up to their competitors to use this DHT without having to do any of the work.
So what advantages do DHTs offer as opposed to questionnaires, for example?
Sure. So DHTs provide information on what the patient is experiencing in real time in real world settings, which is something questionnaires can't usually collect or track very well or as accurately, let's say. This more reflect DHTs will often reflect more on what is going on with a patient themselves. An example of this, let's say you're having a patient with a neurodegenerative type of disorder. There's a DHT where they are sitting in a chair over, let's say, a half-hour period or an hour period, and they probably have to do this several times throughout a clinical trial. But it's collecting information such as how much pressure various muscles can generate, how much rotation they have in their various body parts, that is able to be measured more accurately through this type of chair that's software driven, collecting large amounts of data as this patient is sitting in a chair, which your typical physician is not going to be able to measure just by looking at and observing the patient without this type of technology available.
What solutions might be applied to help adapt more DHTs into clinical trial setting?
So why we are seeing more trials this year than the past several years combined that are employing digital health technologies. And this trend is only going to be accelerating because we know the value of collecting data through DHTs. What we've been seeing lately, the past couple of years, are these third-party nonprofit organizations that are therapeutic area based, independently validating and verifying validating and verifying digital health technologies so they can be used by all different types of pharmaceutical and biotech companies in the future. So they're doing this independently, and they know it takes time, and it is, an expensive proposition for them to do this. But once they have these validated and verified, then pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies can go and lease these validated and verified questionnaires from these third-party independent vendors. We're also seeing that some of these larger engineering firms, and I'll give you an example, Apple, for one, is they're starting their own departments that validate and verify their instruments. Now, that's not common, but there are a number of companies that have started this within the past few years. And then the third item that we're seeing is that some pharma and biotech companies are going at risk in their trial using a DHT that is not yet validated and verified because they know time is very important with this. They have to start their trials, and they know it might take a year or so to get this DHT validated and verified. So they're doing it in parallel. Now, it is a bit risky to do it because if your validation and verification of the DHT is not successful, then you may have lost large amounts of data in the trial itself. But this is what's been happening over the past couple of years, which is why now we are just starting to see a much greater increase of use in digital health technologies. And this trend is only going to continue.
So is there a regulatory pathway for FDA approval for the use of DHTs that's required for a clinical trial or clinical monitoring?
So there's no real requirement for these to be FDA cleared, which is the terminology you would use for digital health technology. Now, a engineering company, let's say, can get a 510K clearance on their digital health technology through the FDA. It's a regulatory process where they have shown that they are able to clinically, first analytically validate and then clinically validate their DHT for use for a particular claim in a particular patient population. If that is the case, any pharmaceutical or biotech company can then use that DHT without essentially any further work. But it has to be used exactly as on the label, with the instructions per label, the data collection tool itself, and then the algorithm that's used, which may be proprietary to the engineering company that developed the DHT, but there cannot be any deviation. So the other way, which does not require a 510K, is any pharma or biotech company or even an engineering firm can do what's called a phase 0 trial, which is where they first do an analytical validation trial to determine that their device, the DHT itself, works in it similarly to what's called a reference method. And if that is shown to be true, then they will go on to a clinical validation study, which is now doing a similar study, but in the patient population of interest for an outcome of interest. And once you can demonstrate both analytical validation and clinical validation, present that information to FDA, and there's no formal yes or no, but everybody is in agreement that, yeah, this looks like it's will work on this patient population for this label claim. Then the pharma or biotech company can go ahead and use that in their trial.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Adam, for your insights on the current and future use of DHTs for clinical trial monitoring. If you have questions or would like more information on the use of DHTs in clinical trial monitoring and the potential role of third-party verification and validation for DHT devices, contact us here at Shabas Solutions. Thank you again for joining us and have a good afternoon.